I stand at the edge of the cemetery, my old trench coat pulling at my shoulders like a disapproving hand. The rain has stopped, but the air remains heavy with moisture, clinging to my face and making my collar itch. Funerals have their own particular scent: cut lilies, cheap cologne, and rain-soaked earth, a combination that always leaves me feeling like I'm drowning on dry land. I've attended too many of these over the years, and they never get easier, just more familiar, like revisiting the scene of an old crime. The mourners huddle in small, whispered clusters beneath a gray October sky. Black umbrellas fold and unfold like the wings of nervous birds. I recognize some faces from newspaper photographs, others from my case files, all wearing identical masks of solemn grief, some more convincing than others. Elizabeth Bailey's murder has brought out the entire town, though I suspect half are here for the spectacle rather than the sorrow. My hands feel numb in my pockets, but there's a warmth in my chest, an uncomfortable heat that I recognize as guilt. Guilt because I'm studying these people professionally, even at a funeral. Guilt because part of me is already wondering which one might be responsible for Elizabeth's death, cataloging expressions and behaviors like evidence. Claire Bailey stands beside the casket, a portrait of composure that feels almost practiced. She's tall and thin, with dark, curly hair pulled back so severely it must hurt. Her expression betrays nothing, but her hands, they tell a different story. They twist a tissue into oblivion, rebuilding and destroying it with methodical precision, the sign of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. I've seen it before, usually in interrogation rooms. The service ends with a quiet prayer, and the crowd begins to disperse. I should leave too. I only came out of respect for an old case connection. But something keeps my feet planted in the soft, yielding ground. Perhaps it's the flash of recognition in Claire's eyes when she spots me, or the way she suddenly straightens her already rigid posture before making her way over. "Detective Marshall," she says, her voice as crisp as the autumn air. "I didn't expect to see you here." "It's just Ray now," I correct her, uncomfortable with the title I no longer carry. "Retired 3 years ago. I'm sorry about your sister." Claire nods, her eyes flitting around the cemetery as if checking who might be watching us talk. "Yes, well, thank you for coming. Elizabeth always spoke highly of your work on the Harrington case. That was years ago, a missing persons case that ended better than most. Elizabeth Bailey had been a social worker then, one of the few who actually seemed to care about the outcome beyond the paperwork. "How are you holding up?" I ask, knowing the question is inadequate but necessary. "As well as can be expected," she replies automatically. Then her voice drops, loses some of its practiced steadiness. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you. About Rose." I glance over Claire's shoulder to where a small figure sits alone on a bench beneath a maple tree. Rose Bailey, Elizabeth's daughter. 11 years old and completely blind since age 6, according to the newspaper articles. A child who heard her mother being murdered but couldn't see the killer. The thought sits like a stone in my stomach. "What about her?" I ask, though I already suspect where this is heading. Claire's fingers resume their nervous dance with the tissue. "She's been difficult since it happened. The police interviewed her, of course, but they didn't get much. She couldn't see anything, and the trauma—" She trails off, shaking her head. "But lately she's been saying things, strange things." "What kind of things?" I keep my voice neutral, professional, a habit I can't seem to break. She insists she knows things about that night that she couldn't possibly know, details about the person who— Claire swallows hard. She claims she can remember smells from that night, specific ones. The police think it's just trauma, her mind trying to make sense of what happened. I watch Rose on her bench. She sits unnaturally still, her face tilted slightly upward as if listening to something far away. Her small hands rest in her lap, pale and motionless. "And what do you think?" I ask, returning my attention to Claire. "I think my niece is a deeply traumatized child with an overactive imagination," she says firmly. Then her voice softens, uncertainty creeping in. "But I also think the police have already moved on. The case is growing cold, and they've got nothing. I'm not asking you to solve Elizabeth's murder, Ray. I'm just asking you to talk to Rose. Maybe you'll see something the others missed." A familiar heaviness settles over me, the weight of expectation, of hope that I might make sense of the senseless. I should say no. I'm retired. I've seen where obsession with cold cases leads. The last thing a child like Rose needs is some washed-up detective dredging up painful memories. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," I say, even as part of me, the part that never really retired, begins to turn over possibilities. "Please," Claire says, and for the first time her composure cracks just enough to show the fear underneath. "You were good at this once, and Rose won't talk to anyone else. I've tried therapists, counselors. She just sits there, silent as a stone." I sigh, feeling the trap of my own curiosity closing around me. "I'll talk to her. That's all I can promise." Claire's relief is palpable, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. "Thank you. For old friendship's sake, if nothing else. Old friendship is stretching it. We were professional acquaintances at best, but I let it pass." My eyes drift back to Rose, still sitting alone while funeral attendees give her a wide berth. No one quite knows what to say to the blind girl whose mother was murdered while she lay sleeping in the next room. "Has she always been so still?" I ask. Claire follows my gaze. "No, before she was like any other child. Louder, maybe, more determined because of her blindness. Now she's quiet except when she starts talking about the smells." She hesitates. "There's something else. Something she said that the police dismissed, but—" I wait, feeling the hook sink deeper. "She says she knows who killed her mother. Not a name, but a smell. A perfume she recognized at the crime scene. She insists she's smelled it before." Claire's voice has dropped to barely above a whisper. "Ray, she says she'll recognize it if she smells it again." I look at Rose one more time. She's turned her head in our direction, though she can't possibly see us. Something in her posture suggests she knows we're talking about her. I've been pulled into cases by less, dragged back into the darkness by thinner threads than this. "I'll need to speak with her alone," I say, already regretting the words as they leave my mouth. Claire nods, relief and something else. Anxiety, perhaps, flickering across her face. "Of course. After the reception? At the house?" "Fine." The word feels like surrender. As the remaining mourners drift toward their cars, I can't shake the feeling that I've just stepped into something I won't be able to easily leave behind. The sky darkens overhead, promising more rain. Perfect funeral weather, I think grimly. Perfect weather for digging up the past. The final prayers end, but no one seems eager to leave. Mourners line up to place roses on the casket, murmuring practiced condolences to Claire and averting their eyes from Rose. I hang back, watching. The girl sits rigid on her bench, small hands gripping the wooden edge like it might float away without her anchor. Her hair is pulled into neat braids, too perfect to be her own doing, and her dark glasses reflect the gray sky in perfect miniature. Something about her stillness unsettles me. It's not the patience of a child accustomed to waiting, but the alertness of a prey animal sensing danger. The minister gestures toward the casket, inviting family members for a final moment before it's lowered. Claire gently takes Rose's elbow, guiding her forward. The child moves with the careful precision of the blind, each step measured, yet there's a fluidity that suggests she's navigated this world without sight for some time now. I find myself holding my breath as they approach the casket, studying Rose's face for any crack in her composure. It happens when they're 3 steps from the casket. Rose stops abruptly, as if she's walked into an invisible wall. Her head tilts upward, nostrils flaring slightly. Claire tugs at her arm, whispers something in her ear, but the girl won't budge. Her small body begins to tremble. "No," Rose says, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "No, I won't." Claire bends down, speaking urgently into her ear. I can't hear the words, but the tension in her shoulders tells me enough. The mourners shift uncomfortably, witnessing private grief made public. The minister clears his throat, ready with some platitude to smooth over the moment. Before he can speak, Rose pulls away from Claire with surprising strength and turns, her face swinging wildly as if searching for something or someone in the crowd. "It's here," she says, her voice rising. "It's here again." I step forward without thinking, some old instinct kicking in. Claire catches my eye, a silent plea in her expression. I approach slowly, aware of the eyes on my back, the murmurs behind cupped hands. "Rose," I say gently, stopping a few feet away. "I'm Ray Marshall. I knew your mother." Her head swivels toward my voice, face tilting up. For a moment she's perfectly still, and I wonder if I've made a mistake. Then her hand shoots out, fingers splayed, searching the air between us. I step closer, letting her find me. Her fingers connect with my coat, and she latches on with startling ferocity, pulling herself against me. I freeze, unused to such contact, especially from a child. Rose presses her face into the rough wool of my trench coat and inhales deeply. Testing me, I realize, memorizing my scent. "You smell like coffee and old books," she says, her voice muffled against my side. "And something else, something burnt." "Cigarettes," I admit, though I haven't smoked in years. "The smell sticks around." She nods, as if confirming something important. Her grip on my coat loosens slightly, but she doesn't let go. The mourners have begun to disperse, giving us space, their curiosity satisfied for now. Claire hovers nearby, relief and anxiety warring on her face. "I need to tell you something," Rose whispers, her voice so low I have to bend down to hear her. "But not here." "They're listening." "Who's listening, Rose?" She shakes her head, lips pressed into a thin line. Her face is pale and drawn, too serious for a child her age. Up close, I can see where her dark glasses don't quite hide the scars around her eyes, reminders of whatever accident took her sight. "The same perfume," she says finally, her voice barely audible. "I smelled it just now. The same one from that night. The night Mom died." A chill runs through me that has nothing to do with the October air. "You're sure?" She nods, her grip tightening on my coat again. "It's sharp, like flowers that have turned poisonous. Mom always said some perfumes were too loud. This one screams." I glance around at the thinning crowd, trying to catalog the women present. Dozens of potential suspects, if I'm taking Rose at her word. Which I'm not, I remind myself. Not yet. Children process trauma in strange ways. The mind creates connections, looking for patterns in chaos. "Did you tell the police about this?" I ask, keeping my voice neutral. A bitter smile touches her lips, startling on such a young face. "They said I was confused. That stress can make you imagine things." Her head tilts, considering. "You don't believe me either." It's not a question. I consider lying, but something tells me Rose would know. "I believe you smelled something," I say carefully. I'm just not sure what it means yet." She nods, seeming satisfied with this answer. "That's fair. Mom always said you were honest, even when it wasn't comfortable." The comment catches me off guard. Elizabeth Bailey talked about me to her daughter. Filed away for later, I decide. Claire approaches cautiously. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Rose answers before I can speak. "Mr. Marshall is going to help us." She finally releases my coat, smoothing the wrinkled fabric with small, precise movements. He doesn't believe me yet, but he will. Claire's eyes meet mine over Rose's head. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation at the house, after the reception?" I nod, suddenly eager to get away from the cemetery with its open space and too many ears. "I'll meet you there." Rose's hand finds mine, small fingers wrapping around my weathered ones with surprising strength. "You promise you'll come?" There's vulnerability in her voice now, the first real hint of the child beneath the composed exterior. "I promise," I say, and mean it. She releases my hand and allows Claire to lead her toward the waiting cars. I watch them go, mind already turning over this new information. Perfume. Such a small detail, easily dismissed. Yet in my experience it's often these tiny fragments that solve cases, the overlooked, the discounted, the seemingly insignificant. As I walk to my car, I catalog what I know. A blind girl who claims to have recognized a scent from the night of her mother's murder. A detail the police dismissed as imagination or trauma. A grieving aunt who seems desperate for closure. And myself. A retired detective with nothing better to do than chase ghosts for old friendship's sake. My hands are cold as I start the engine, but there's a familiar warmth spreading in my chest, the heat of curiosity, of purpose. It's been a while since I felt it. Like greeting an old friend, I think, or perhaps welcoming back an addiction I'd fooled myself into believing I'd conquered. I follow the procession of cars toward the Bailey home, the rain finally starting to fall again, drumming a steady rhythm on the roof of my car. Appropriate weather for what lies ahead, digging through layers of grief and secrets, hoping to find truth buried somewhere beneath. The Bailey living room is a study in careful neutrality. Beige walls, sensible furniture, and family photos with identical frames spaced at precise intervals. The kind of room designed to reveal nothing. Claire has excused herself to put on coffee, leaving me alone with Rose. The girl sits across from me in an armchair too large for her frame, her feet barely touching the floor. Outside, rain taps against the windows like impatient fingers. The house creaks and settles around us, the sounds amplified by our silence. I take the opportunity to study the room more carefully. The photographs show Elizabeth and Rose in happier times, at a beach, beside a Christmas tree, blowing out birthday candles. Claire appears in none of them. The mantelpiece holds a collection of small carved wooden animals, positioned within easy reach of small hands. For Rose to touch, I realize, to see with her fingers what her eyes cannot. "You're looking at Mom's pictures," Rose says suddenly, startling me. Her head is tilted slightly, listening to the subtle shift of my clothing as I move. "The frames make a certain sound when people look at them. Everyone always looks at them first." "You're observant," I say, impressed despite myself. A smile touches her lips. "People think being blind means you miss things. You actually notice more. Just different things." Claire returns with a tray of coffee for us and hot chocolate for Rose. She sets it down carefully, the cups clinking against saucers. "Rose, Mr. Marshall would like to ask you some questions about what you mentioned at the cemetery." Rose wraps her small hands around the mug of hot chocolate. "You want to know about the perfume?" "Yes," I say, leaning forward. "But first, I'd like to understand how you perceive things." Claire starts to interject, but Rose speaks first. You mean, do I really smell what I say I smell? Or am I making it up? There's no accusation in her voice, just a matter-of-fact clarity that's disconcerting coming from an 11-year-old. Something like that, I admit. Rose takes a sip of her chocolate, considering. I can show you, she says finally. Ask me about anyone who was at the funeral today. Anyone at all. I exchange a glance with Claire, who gives a small nod. All right, the minister. Rose's face brightens with recognition. Easy. Peppermint and shoe polish. He sucks on mints during the service, probably to hide that he's been drinking. There's always a hint of alcohol under the mint, and he polishes his shoes right before funerals. The chemical smell clings to his hands. My eyebrows rise. The assessment is surprisingly astute. I'd noticed the minister's slightly unsteady hands myself. The woman who read the poem, I try next. Elizabeth's colleague. Ms. Davis, Rose nods. Cigarettes and lavender hand cream. She tries to cover the smoke smell, but it never works. And she was nervous. When people sweat from nerves, it makes their usual scent sharper. That's remarkable, I say, genuinely impressed. And you can remember all these scents clearly? Distinguish between them? Rose shrugs. It's just how I see the world. Like how you remember faces. I take a sip of coffee, thinking. Tell me about some of the others. For the next 20 minutes, Rose catalogues the funeral attendees by scent with uncanny precision. The neighbor who smells of cat litter and vanilla extract. Elizabeth's boss with his expensive cologne that can't quite mask the onions he had for lunch. The cousin whose perfume never quite covers the medicinal odor of the chemotherapy she's undergoing. With each description, I feel my skepticism eroding. There's too much specific detail, too much accuracy for this to be imagination or lucky guesses. Claire watches silently, relief evident in her posture as I begin to take her niece seriously. And the perfume you mentioned, I say finally, setting down my empty cup. The one from the night your mother died. You smelled it again today? The change is immediate. Rose's body tenses, her hands tightening around her mug. Yes. Can you describe it? She swallows hard. It's difficult. Most scents are simple once you break them down. This one is complicated. Sharp, like I said before. Floral, but with something bitter underneath. Like flowers that grew in poisoned soil. Her voice drops. It burns my nose. Makes my throat feel tight. And you're certain it's the same scent from that night? Absolutely certain. Her voice is steel. I was asleep when it happened, but I woke up when I heard... She stops abruptly. When I heard Mom. The perfume was already in the house, faint, but there. After everything got quiet, it was stronger. Like whoever was wearing it had moved around more. Done things that made them sweat, made the scent release. A chill runs through me. The clinical precision of her description matches what I know about how scent molecules disperse during physical exertion. Did you tell the police exactly this? Rose's mouth twists. I tried. They patted my head and told Claire I was processing trauma in my own way. That sometimes our minds make connections to help us cope. Bitterness edges her words. They didn't even ask who was wearing it today. And who was? I ask quietly. Her face closes, suddenly guarded. I don't know their name, but they stood near the back. Didn't come to the reception afterward. I think they were only there to see, to make sure. Make sure of what, Rose? That everyone believed Mom's death was a random break-in. Her voice wavers for the first time. But it wasn't random. The person wearing that perfume knew Mom. They knew our house. They knew where to find her. Claire makes a small, distressed sound from her seat. Rose, honey, you can't know that for certain. I do know. Rose's chin lifts defiantly. The police never found signs of forced entry. Mom would never let a stranger in that late. but she would open the door for someone she knew. My hands feel suddenly cold. The child is right. The lack of forced entry was one detail that had made the papers, but her conclusion shows a detective's mind at work. "Rose," I say carefully, "did your mother have enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her?" Claire starts to object, but Rose answers first. "Mom helped people, but sometimes that meant making others angry. She would never talk about work at home, but I heard things. Phone calls late at night, arguments she thought I couldn't hear." Elizabeth Bailey had been a social worker, I recall, the kind of profession that could put you in contact with desperate people, volatile situations. "You believe Rose?" Claire says. Not quite a question. She sounds both relieved and frightened. I run a hand over my face, feeling the day's stubble rough against my palm. "I believe she has an extraordinary ability," I say carefully, "and I believe it would be a mistake to dismiss what she's telling us. The admission costs me something. Professional detachment, perhaps, or the comfortable distance of skepticism. Either way, I feel myself sliding into this case like a man sinking into quicksand, slowly, inexorably, with full awareness of the danger." Rose's face softens with relief. "You'll help us find who did it." Images flash unbidden through my mind, other cases, other promises made and broken. The Harrington girl we found too late, the Jensen boy we never found at all. My own daughter, Emma, who slipped away not through violence but through illness. A different kind of unsolved case, one where all my detective skills meant nothing in the end. My silence stretches too long. Rose leans forward, her hand finding mine on the coffee table between us. Her fingers brush mine, and I feel a spark, static from the dry air, but it jolts me nonetheless. "You're thinking about someone you lost," she says softly. "I can smell the grief on you. It's like old leaves and rain." The accuracy of her perception leaves me breathless. Claire looks away, giving me a moment to compose myself. "I'll help you," I say finally, my voice rougher than I intended. "I can't promise results, but I'll look into it. For your mother's sake." Rose nods, satisfied. "And for the truth," she adds. "Mom always said the truth matters most, even when it hurts." As I drive home later through the rain-slick streets, Rose's words echo in my mind. The truth matters most, even when it hurts. I wonder if Elizabeth Bailey still believed that in her final moments, with the scent of that mysterious perfume filling her home, her killer standing before her. I roll down the window despite the rain, letting the cold air clear my head. I'm not officially on the case. The police would laugh if I claimed to be investigating based on a blind girl's sense of smell. But official or not, I'm involved now. The familiar weight of responsibility settles over me, both burden and purpose. Tomorrow I'll start digging into Elizabeth Bailey's life, her work, her secrets. Tonight, I'll go home to my empty apartment and dust off the caseboard I promised myself I'd never use again. And I'll write a name at the top, Rose Bailey. Not the victim this time, but perhaps the only witness who truly saw anything at all. My office hadn't seen proper use in 3 years, not since I'd packed away my detective's badge and vowed to leave the darkness behind. Now the musty space hummed with renewed purpose as I spread the Bailey case files across my desk. Yellow light from an ancient lamp cast long shadows over autopsy photos and witness statements, none of which mentioned the detail that had drawn me back in. A blind girl's testimony about a perfume that shouldn't have been there. I'd called in a favor with an old colleague at the precinct to get these files. The official police report was thin. Elizabeth Bailey, 42, single mother, social worker, found stabbed in her bedroom. No signs of forced entry, nothing of value taken. Blind daughter asleep in the next room. Case technically open, but growing colder by the day. The kind of murder that slides from front page to forgotten in the space of a week. My office reflected the state of my mind, cluttered but organized in a system only I understood. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each labeled with case names I couldn't bring myself to store away properly. A coffee maker perched precariously on a filing cabinet, dripping the last of a pot I'd brewed hours ago. The corkboard on the wall had been empty yesterday. Now it held photos of Elizabeth Bailey, alive and dead, with red string connecting questions I'd scrawled on index cards. Old habits. The knock at my door came at precisely 2:00. Claire Bailey stood in the hallway, one hand firmly on Rose's shoulder, her expression a mixture of hope and doubt. "You found us," I said, stepping back to let them enter. "My office wasn't designed for clients anymore, especially not children." "Your directions were very specific," Claire replied, guiding Rose forward, and I put the address into my phone. Rose's head swiveled as they entered, her nostrils flaring slightly. "Your office smells like dust and paper, and—" She paused, inhaling deeper. "Sadness." I glanced at Claire, who gave a small shrug. "I've cleared some space over here," I said, gesturing toward a worn leather couch against the wall, then remembering Rose couldn't see the gesture. "The couch is about 5 steps ahead of you." Rose moved forward confidently, her hand trailing along the wall. "I know. I can hear where things are. The room changes how sounds bounce back." She found the couch and sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "Did you find anything in the police reports?" Claire lowered herself next to Rose. "Rose, let Mr. Marshall explain what he's doing first." "It's all right," I said, returning to my desk chair. "The police investigation was thorough in some ways, superficial in others. They focused on the obvious, looking for fingerprints, interviewing neighbors, checking for a connection to your mother's work as a social worker. They asked me the same questions over and over," Rose said, her voice tight with frustration, "like they thought I was making things up or confused." "That happens sometimes," I admitted. "Police have protocols, and they're not always good at adapting when a witness has unusual perceptions." "You mean when a witness is blind?" Rose said flatly. "Yes." No point sugarcoating it for her. "They documented that you heard someone in the house, that you heard your mother's voice and then what sounded like a struggle. But they dismissed your statement about recognizing a scent because they couldn't smell it themselves," Rose said. "They kept asking if I was sure, if maybe I was confused because I was scared." Her small hands balled into fists. I wasn't confused. I believed her, which was the strangest part of all this. 20 years as a detective had made me skeptical of witness statements, especially from traumatized children, but something about Rose's certainty, the precision of her descriptions, rang true. "I'm going to need more details about this perfume," I said. "Anything you can tell me? When you first noticed it, how strong it was, if you'd smelled it before that night?" Rose nodded, her expression serious. "Can I look around your office first? It helps me think." Claire started to object, but I waved her off. "Go ahead, just be careful of the boxes." Rose slid off the couch and began to move around the room with surprising confidence. Her fingers trailed over file boxes, brushed against the spines of books, tapped against my coffee mug. I watched her cataloging my space through touch and smell, building a map in her mind. There was something hypnotic about her movements, deliberate yet fluid. She stopped suddenly near my coat rack, her body going rigid. I saw her nostrils flare once, twice, her head tilting back slightly. Her hand reached out, fingers trembling, and found my trench coat hanging there, the same one I'd worn to the funeral. "It's here," she whispered, her voice suddenly thin. "It's on your coat." Claire half rose from the couch. "Rose, what are you—" "The perfume." Rose's fingers clutched at the fabric of my coat. "It's faint, but it's the same one. From the funeral. From that night." I exchanged a glance with Claire, whose face had gone pale. "Are you sure?" I asked, moving toward Rose. She nodded, her expression intense. "Gardenia nocturne," she said. "That's what it's called. Mom had a client once who wore it. She told me it was discontinued years ago, that only a few people still had bottles." Her fingers ran over the collar of my coat. "It has a bitter undertone, like almonds. Most people can't detect it, but it's there. That's what makes it special. That's how I know it's the same." My hands felt suddenly cold. "You're saying I picked up this scent at the funeral? From someone standing near me?" "Yes." Rose nodded firmly. "It transferred to your coat. It's strongest here, on the right shoulder. Someone brushed against you or stood very close." I tried to remember who had been near me at the cemetery. Dozens of people had milled around after the service. I hadn't paid attention to who might have touched me, or stood close enough to leave a trace of perfume. "And you're absolutely certain this is the same scent from the night your mother was killed?" I pressed. "Positive." Rose's voice held no doubt. "Gardenia nocturne with that bitter almond undertone. It's like a signature. I would know it anywhere." She released my coat and turned to face me, her expression fierce behind her dark glasses. "Someone wearing this perfume killed my mother. Someone who was at her funeral watching us all grieve." Claire made a small, distressed sound. "Rose, honey, you can't just accuse—" "I'm not accusing anyone specific," Rose interrupted. "I'm telling you what I know. The perfume was there that night, it was at the funeral, and now it's here, on Mr. Marshall's coat." She turned her face toward me. "You believe me, don't you?" I did, God help me. My rational mind tried to object. Perfume wasn't exactly hard evidence, but my instincts were shouting that Rose was onto something significant. Gardenia nocturne, a discontinued fragrance, a concrete detail I could actually investigate. "I believe you," I said, surprising myself with how firmly I meant it. "And this gives us something specific to work with." The tension in Rose's shoulders eased slightly. "Good, because the police never even asked for the name." I crossed to my desk and wrote it down. Gardenia nocturne. Bitter almond undertone. Discontinued. My first real lead, courtesy of a blind 11-year-old with an exceptional nose. I wasn't sure whether to be impressed or terrified by where this investigation was heading. "I'll need to figure out who at the funeral might have been wearing this perfume," I said, thinking aloud, "and how many people would still have access to a discontinued fragrance." "I can help," Rose said immediately. "I remember everyone who was there, what they smelled like." I nodded, forgetting momentarily that she couldn't see the gesture. "Yes, you can help. But right now, I need you to tell me everything else you remember about that night. Even the smallest detail might matter." As Rose began to speak, I felt a familiar warmth spreading in my chest, the heat of a case coming to life, of pieces beginning to align. It had been too long since I'd felt it, this sense of purpose. But beneath the warmth lay something colder. The knowledge that whoever had killed Elizabeth Bailey had been bold enough to attend her funeral, to stand among the mourners, perhaps even to offer condolences to her orphaned daughter. That kind of killer was the most dangerous kind of all, and now they knew we were looking. The Bailey kitchen felt nothing like the sterile living room. Here, life had left its mark in coffee rings on the wooden table, a child's faded height chart penciled on the doorframe, and the lingering scent of countless family meals. I sat with my notebook open, watching Rose trail her fingers along the table's edge, her face tilted as if listening to the house itself. Claire stood by the sink, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her earlier composure fraying at the edges as Rose prepared to conjure the ghosts of their last family dinner. "Are you sure this is necessary?" Claire asked, her voice tight. "Rose has already been through so much." "It was my idea," Rose said before I could answer. Her hand found the back of a kitchen chair with unerring precision. "I told Mr. Marshall that I could show him where everyone was sitting. The police never asked." I cleared my throat. "Sometimes returning to the scene helps clarify details, but only if you're comfortable, Rose." "I'm not fragile," she said with sudden fierceness. "Everyone keeps treating me like I'll break." "I won't." Claire's mouth thinned, but she nodded. "All right. But we stop the moment it becomes too much." Rose ignored this, focusing instead on the task at hand. "It was a Thursday night. Mom always made pasta on Thursdays because she got home late from the community center." Her fingers traced the edge of the table. "There were 5 of us: Mom, me, Aunt Claire, Uncle Michael, and Aunt Marianne." I jotted this down, keeping my voice neutral. "Marianne is Uncle Michael's sister," Claire supplied. "She was visiting for the week, stayed with us instead of a hotel." I noted how Claire's posture had stiffened at the mention of Marianne, filing it away for later. "Go on, Rose." Rose moved with quiet confidence around the table, her fingers trailing over the backs of chairs. "Mom sat here, at the head of the table." She tapped the chair at the far end. "I can still smell traces of her hand lotion, lavender and shea butter. She always put it on before dinner because the case files dried out her skin." I watched her work, impressed by her methodical approach. She moved to the next chair on the right. "I sat here next to Mom." A small smile touched her lips. "Mom said I always smelled like apple shampoo in the playground, said she could tell where I'd been all day just by breathing in." The simple recollection hung in the air, a moment of warmth amidst the clinical reconstruction. Rose's hand moved across the table to the chair opposite her own. "Uncle Michael sat here. His chair always smelled like his aftershave, something with sandalwood that gave me headaches." Her nose wrinkled at the memory. "He sweats when he eats spicy food, which makes the smell stronger. Even now there's a trace of it on the cushion." I glanced at Claire. "Michael isn't here today?" "Business trip," she said shortly. "He travels frequently." Rose continued her circuit, moving to the chair adjacent to where Michael had sat. "Aunt Claire was here. Her spot always smells like that rose hand sanitizer she uses," she demonstrated, mimicking the motion of rubbing hands together. "Click, click, click goes the bottle before every meal. Mom used to tease her about it." Claire's cheeks flushed slightly. "I work with the public. It's just good hygiene." Rose nodded absently, already moving to the final chair, directly across from where Elizabeth had sat at the head of the table. Her demeanor changed as her fingers touched the chair back. The confidence in her movements faltered, replaced by tension that radiated through her small frame. "And this is where Aunt Marianne sat," she said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "This is where the perfume was strongest." The room seemed to grow colder at her words. Claire's knuckles whitened where she gripped the counter edge. "Gardenia Nocturne," I said, watching Claire's reaction carefully. "The same perfume you detected on my coat from the funeral." Rose nodded, her fingers still resting on the back of Marianne's chair. "It's fainter now, but it's here. That bitter almond undertone is unmistakable. Aunt Marianne always wore too much of it. Mom said it gave her migraines." "And Marianne was at the funeral?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Standing at the back," Rose confirmed. "She didn't come to the reception afterward. She claimed she had a flight to catch." Claire cleared her throat. "Marianne travels extensively for work. She's rarely in town." "Except she was in town the night your sister was murdered," I observed, keeping my tone neutral. Rose's hand moved from the chair back to the table surface, fingers splayed as if reading Braille. "There's something else about that night. Something important." Her brow furrowed with concentration. "Aunt Marianne left early, before dessert. She said she had a headache, but—" "But what, Rose?" I prompted gently when she trailed off. "She didn't smell sick." Rose's face lifted toward me, her expression intense behind her dark glasses. When people are sick, their scent changes. There's a sourness, especially with headaches. But Aunt Marianne just smelled angry. "You can smell anger?" Claire asked, skepticism edging her voice. "Of course," Rose said, as if this were obvious. "Fear smells sharp and metallic. Happiness is warm, like bread. Anger is hot and acidic, like vinegar boiling. Aunt Marianne was angry all through dinner, but especially after Mom took a phone call." I leaned forward. "What phone call?" Rose frowned, concentrating. "It was during the main course. Mom's phone rang, and she took it in her study. When she came back, she seemed worried. She and Aunt Marianne had a whispered argument while you were in the kitchen getting more sauce," she added, turning toward Claire. Claire's face had gone pale. "I don't remember any argument. They thought I couldn't hear because Uncle Michael was talking to me about school," Rose continued. "But I heard Mom say something about policy terms and ethical obligations, and Aunt Marianne said, 'You always were too righteous for your own good.'" I wrote this down, my interest thoroughly piqued. "What time did Marianne leave that night?" "Around 8, Rose said. "She said she needed to lie down, but she took her purse and coat. I heard the front door close a few minutes later." "And what time was your mother killed?" I asked gently. "The police think sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning," Claire answered when Rose hesitated. "Rose was asleep. She only woke up when she heard sounds from Elizabeth's room." Rose's fingers had begun to tremble slightly where they rested on the table. "I woke up because I smelled the perfume again. It was stronger than at dinner, like she'd put on more. I heard Mom's voice, then something falling, then—" She swallowed hard. "Then nothing but footsteps leaving. By the time I found my way to Mom's room, she was already gone, but the perfume was everywhere." Claire abruptly turned to the sink and ran the water, her back to us. "This is all circumstantial," she said, her voice strained. "Marianne is family. She would never—" "What does Marianne do for work, exactly?" I interrupted, watching Claire's rigid posture. "She's in insurance," Claire said after a moment's hesitation. "Risk assessment for a large firm. That's why she travels so much." "Insurance." Something clicked in my mind. "And Elizabeth? Did her work ever intersect with insurance matters?" Claire turned back to face us, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes wary. "As a social worker, sometimes, I suppose. She dealt with medical coverage for clients, disability claims, that sort of thing. She was investigating fraud," Rose said suddenly. All our attention snapped to her. "I remember now. The week before she died, Mom was working late every night. She told me she was looking into some suspicious claims patterns. She said someone was taking advantage of vulnerable people." Claire's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Rose, honey, I'm sure you're confused. Elizabeth never mentioned any fraud investigation to me." "She wouldn't," Rose said simply. "She told me she couldn't trust anyone until she had proof." Her head tilted as if remembering something. "She said sometimes family ties make people blind to what's right in front of them." The implication hung in the air between us. Claire's hands twisted together, a gesture so similar to the way she'd destroyed the tissue at the funeral that I couldn't help but notice. "Do you know which insurance company your mother was investigating?" I asked Rose. "Continental Assurance," she replied without hesitation. "She had their files spread all over her desk that week." Claire made a small sound, quickly disguised as a cough. I made a note, then closed my notebook. "Thank you, Rose. This has been extremely helpful." I stood, gathering my things. "I'd like to speak with your Uncle Michael when he returns from his trip, and perhaps arrange a meeting with Aunt Marianne as well." "Marianne is in Europe on business," Claire said quickly. "She won't be back for weeks." "I see." I kept my tone neutral. "Well, when she returns, then, In the meantime, I'll be looking into Continental Assurance and any connections to your sister's work." Rose had remained by Marianne's chair, her fingers still resting lightly on its back. "She was here," she said softly, almost to herself. "The night Mom died, Aunt Marianne came back." "I know she did." Claire moved swiftly to Rose's side, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "That's enough for today, I think. Rose needs to rest." I nodded, though I wasn't ready to leave. Rose had given me more in 20 minutes than the police had gathered in weeks. An insurance fraud investigation. A family member with means, opportunity, and potentially a powerful motive. And a distinctive perfume that connected everything together. As Claire showed me to the door, her composure had returned, but there was a new brittleness to it, like thin ice over deep water. "Thank you for your time," I said, pausing on the threshold. "You've been very helpful." "Have I?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or have I just helped you suspect my family of murder?" I didn't have an answer for that. Behind her, I could see Rose still standing in the kitchen, her hand on the chair, her face turned toward us with an expression of fierce determination that reminded me suddenly, painfully, of her mother's photograph. The truth matters most, even when it hurts. Elizabeth's words, spoken through her daughter. As I walked to my car, I wondered just how much this particular truth was going to hurt before we were through. The alley behind Pearson's funeral home smelled of garbage and stale rainwater, nothing like the antiseptic floral scent of its tasteful interior. I hadn't planned on bringing Rose here. Following a hunch about the funeral home's contract with Continental Assurance was supposed to be a solo mission, but when I'd mentioned my destination to Claire, Rose had insisted with a determination that brooked no argument. Now she walked beside me, one hand resting lightly on my arm, her head tilted as she sorted through the malodorous symphony of the narrow passageway with a concentration that made her look decades older than 11. "Slow down," she murmured, her fingers tightening on my sleeve. "There's something here." I paused, scanning the alley. Dumpsters lined one wall, their contents spilling over after the weekend. The funeral home's rear entrance stood 50 yards ahead, its security light flickering erratically in the late afternoon gloom. Nothing seemed out of place, but I'd learned to trust Rose's senses. "What do you smell?" I asked quietly. "It's faint, but it's here." Her nostrils flared delicately. "Gardenia nocturne. Someone wearing it passed through this alley recently." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October air. My research had confirmed Rose's claim. Gardenia nocturne was indeed a discontinued fragrance, produced in limited quantities by a French perfumer who'd gone out of business years ago. A bottle would be rare, expensive, and difficult to trace. The perfect signature for someone who valued exclusivity or anonymity. "This way." Rose tugged me forward, her cane tapping lightly against the asphalt. "It gets stronger toward the end of the alley." We moved carefully past overflowing bins and puddles of questionable origin. The brick walls rose high on either side, blocking what little sunlight remained in the late afternoon sky. A cat yowled somewhere nearby, the sound echoing eerily between the buildings. "My meeting with the funeral director was informative," I said as we walked. "Pearson's handles the employee benefits for Continental Assurance locally. They have for 15 years. "So Aunt Marianne would know Mr. Pearson well," Rose observed, connecting the dots faster than most adults would. "Very well," I confirmed. "According to his secretary, Marianne Bailey is on their board of directors and visits quarterly for meetings. She was here the week before your mother died." Rose nodded as if this merely confirmed what she already knew. "The perfume is getting stronger," she said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "It's—" She turned her head sharply to the right. "There. Something's there." I followed her gesture toward what I'd initially taken for a pile of discarded furniture behind the last dumpster. Now I could make out the distinctive shape of a car, covered with a tarp that had partially collapsed, explaining my oversight. It sat in the narrow space between the dumpster and wall, hidden from casual observation. "Stay here," I told Rose, gently disengaging her hand from my arm. "No." Her voice was firm. "I need to confirm it's the same scent. You can't do that part." She had a point. I sighed, then guided her carefully toward the vehicle, scanning the alley for any sign we were being watched. The space felt deserted, but my old instincts were on high alert. The car was a silver sedan with rental plates, its windows rolled up tight against the elements. I pulled back the tarp for a better look, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Rose coughed, then suddenly went rigid beside me. "It's here," she whispered, her voice tight with tension. "The perfume, it's all over this car. Whoever was wearing it spent significant time inside." I tried the driver's side door, expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it opened smoothly. The interior smelled musty from days of sitting untouched, but underneath was another scent. Floral, distinctive, with a bitter note that seemed to catch at the back of my throat. "That's it," Rose said with certainty. "Gardenia nocturne, stronger than I've smelled it since." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I helped Rose into the passenger seat, then slid behind the wheel, pulling on a pair of latex gloves I'd kept in my pocket out of old habit. The car contained the usual detritus of temporary use: fast food wrappers, coffee cups, a map of the local area folded incorrectly. Nothing immediately incriminating, but nothing innocent either. "Check the glove compartment," Rose suggested, her hands already exploring the dashboard in front of her. Inside the glove compartment, I found rental documentation from an agency at the airport, dated the day before Elizabeth's murder and returned, allegedly, the morning after. The name on the form was M. Bailey, with Continental Assurance listed as the billing address. "Marianne rented this car," I said, photographing the document with my phone. "But according to Claire, Marianne left town immediately after dinner that night. If that were true, why abandon a rental car in an alley?" Rose's fingers continued to move across the surfaces around her, reading the car's secrets through touch. "There's something stuck between the seats," she said suddenly, her hand disappearing into the crack of the passenger seat. "Something papery." She extracted a folded bundle of documents, creased and slightly damp from the car's interior humidity. I took them gently from her hands and unfolded them under the dim overhead light. "Insurance policies," I said, scanning the pages. 5 of them, all from Continental Assurance, all with substantial payouts for accidental death. I flipped through them, a cold feeling spreading in my chest. And all processed by the same agent, Marianne Bailey. "What else?" Rose pressed, sensing my hesitation. "Death certificates," I continued, my voice tightening. "All ruled accidents or natural causes, but all within weeks of the policies being activated. And letters, complaints from family members questioning the circumstances, addressed to the state insurance commissioner. These look like copies of the files your mother was gathering." Rose nodded slowly. "Mom was building a case against her own sister-in-law, against Aunt Marianne, and potentially against Continental Assurance itself," I added, continuing to photograph each document. If the company was aware of the pattern and covered it up, Rose's hand suddenly stilled on the dashboard. "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Something small, in the crevice by the gear shift." I reached where she indicated and felt something metallic and small. Extracting it carefully, I found myself holding a delicate silver charm in the shape of a cat, the kind that would hang from a bracelet. "What is it?" Rose asked, sensing my sudden tension. "A charm," I said, placing it in her outstretched palm. "Silver, in the shape of a cat." Rose's fingers traced its outline, her expression changing from concentration to recognition. "This is Mom's," she said with absolute certainty. "From her bracelet. Dad gave her a charm every anniversary. This was the last one from before he died. She never took that bracelet off." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Elizabeth Bailey had been in this car, or at minimum, her bracelet charm had. Combined with the documents and the perfume, the picture becoming clear was deeply disturbing. "I think your mother confronted Marianne," I said quietly. "After discovering the fraud, she must have arranged to meet her, perhaps to give her a chance to explain or confess before going to the authorities. But instead, Marianne killed her," Rose finished, her voice steady despite the horror of the words. "She went to our house later that night after everyone was asleep." I carefully bagged the charm and the documents, my mind racing through the implications. "We need to take this to the police," I said. "These documents, combined with your testimony about the perfume—" "Won't be enough," Rose interrupted, surprising me. "We need absolute proof that Aunt Marianne was in our house that night, something the police can't ignore or dismiss as circumstantial." She was right, frustrating as it was. A distinctive perfume, an abandoned rental car, stolen documents, and a missing charm. Compelling to me, but possibly not enough for an arrest warrant, especially against someone with Marianne's resources and connections. "There's more evidence out there," I said, helping Rose out of the car. "Your mother was thorough. She would have kept copies of her findings somewhere." "In her home office," Rose said immediately. "She had a hidden safe behind the bookcase. Only she and I knew about it. She used to let me feel the dial turning, taught me to count the clicks." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. "The combination was my birthday." Our fingers brushed as I guided her back toward the alley entrance, and I felt a spark, static from the dry air, but it jolted me nonetheless. Or perhaps it was the electricity of a case breaking open, of pieces falling into place after too long in disarray. "We need to get to that safe before anyone else does," I said, picking up our pace. "If Marianne realizes we're this close, she might decide to tie up loose ends." Rose's hand tightened on my arm. "You mean she might come after me?" I couldn't lie to her. "Yes, you're the only witness who can place her at the scene through the perfume, and now you know about the fraud as well." Instead of fear, Rose's expression showed only determination. "Then we better hurry, because Aunt Claire called Marianne this morning, right after you left our house. I heard her say that you were asking questions, that you believed me about the perfume." My blood ran cold. If Marianne knew we were investigating, she'd already be taking steps to protect herself, perhaps even planning to return to Green Hollow sooner than Claire had indicated. "We're going directly to your house," I decided. "Right now, we need whatever is in that safe, and we need to make sure you're safe." As we emerged from the alley, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. I scanned the area, suddenly hyper-aware of every car, every movement in my peripheral vision. The case had shifted from an investigation to a race against time, and potentially a matter of life and death. For a moment, I questioned my decision to involve Rose so directly. She was a child, after all, and already traumatized by her mother's murder. But as I glanced down at her face, set with the same determination I'd seen in countless photos of Elizabeth Bailey, I knew there was no protecting her by keeping her in the dark. She was already involved, had been since the moment she woke to the scent of gardenia nocturne in her home on the night her mother died. "Let's go," I said, guiding her toward my car. "Your mother trusted you with the combination to her safe. Now I'm trusting you to help me finish what she started." Rose nodded, her grip on my arm unwavering. "She won't get away with it," she said quietly. Mom always said the truth catches up eventually, no matter how carefully you cover your tracks. As we drove away from the funeral home, I couldn't help but wonder what other truths were waiting to be uncovered, and whether we'd live long enough to bring them all to light. The Bailey living room had transformed under the cover of night. No longer the carefully arranged neutral space of afternoon visits, it now felt like a stage set for the final act of a tragedy that had been years in the making. The lamps cast pools of amber light that seemed to avoid the corners where shadows gathered like conspirators. My hands were numb from the night air, but my chest burned with a different kind of cold, the certainty of what was to come, and the knowledge that, once spoken, some words could never be taken back. Rose sat beside me on the sofa, her posture rigid but her face composed. Across from us, Claire perched on the edge of an armchair, fingers rhythmically smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. Michael Bailey occupied the chair beside her, his stocky frame seeming too large for the delicate furniture. His return from his business trip had been unexpectedly swift, almost as if someone had called him home. "I appreciate you both meeting with us tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the tension that hung in the air like smoke. "Rose and I have made some significant discoveries regarding Elizabeth's murder. At this hour?" Michael's voice carried a forced joviality that didn't reach his ruddy face. "Couldn't this wait until morning?" "No," Rose answered before I could. "It couldn't." The certainty in her voice silenced the room. I placed my briefcase on the coffee table between us and opened it slowly, deliberately. The manila folder inside contained photographs of every document we'd found in the rental car, plus one additional set, the papers from Elizabeth's hidden safe, which Rose had led me to earlier that evening. The combination, her birthday, had worked exactly as she'd described. "Let's start with what we know," I said, removing the first set of photographs. Elizabeth was investigating insurance fraud at Continental Assurance in the weeks before her death. Specifically, policies with suspicious payouts following accidental deaths, all processed by the same agent. I laid out the photos in a careful row. Claire's breathing quickened. Michael's face flushed darker. "That's confidential company information," Michael snapped. "Where did you get that?" "From a rental car abandoned behind Pearson's funeral home," I answered calmly. "A car rented by Monsieur Bailey the day before Elizabeth's murder." Claire's hand went to her throat. "That's ridiculous. Marianne returned that car to the airport. She showed me the receipt." "Did she?" I removed another photograph, the rental agreement with its damning date stamp. "Because according to this, the car was never returned. It's been sitting behind the funeral home for weeks." I paused, watching their faces. "A funeral home that, coincidentally, handles Continental Assurance's employee benefits. This is circumstantial at best," Michael said, but his voice had lost its bluster. "You're making connections that don't exist." Rose's hand found mine on the sofa cushion between us. Her fingers were cold but steady. "Tell them about the charm, Mr. Marshall." I produced the small evidence bag containing the silver cat charm. "This was found in the rental car," I said, placing it on the table. Rose identified it as belonging to her mother's bracelet, a bracelet Elizabeth never removed. Claire stared at the tiny silver object, her composure finally cracking. "That doesn't prove anything. It could have fallen off anywhere, been planted." "There's more," I interrupted gently, removing the final set of photographs, the contents of Elizabeth's safe. "Your sister kept copies of everything, Claire, including emails between Continental's board members discussing how to handle her inquiries. Emails that mention Marianne by name and express concern about her methods becoming public. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Michael's face had gone from red to ashen, and Claire's hands had finally stilled in her lap, frozen in the act of smoothing away truths that could no longer be hidden. "You've been protecting her," Rose said quietly, her face turned toward her aunt. "You knew, didn't you?" Claire's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I couldn't believe—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Elizabeth called me that night, after everyone had gone to bed. She said she had proof that Marianne was involved in something terrible, that she was going to the authorities in the morning. I told her to wait, to be certain." Her voice broke. "That was the last time I spoke to my sister." "And you called Marianne this morning," I said, not a question, "after we left, to warn her we were getting close." Claire's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I've known Marianne for 15 years. She's my husband's sister. I couldn't believe she would—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The sound of a key in the front door lock cut through the room like a gunshot. We all turned as the door swung open, revealing a silhouette backlit by the porch light. The scent reached us before the figure stepped fully into the light. Floral, distinctive, with that bitter almond undertone that seemed to burn the back of my throat even from across the room. Rose went rigid beside me, her hand gripping mine with sudden force. "It's her," she whispered, her voice strained. "That's the perfume. That's exactly it." Marianne Bailey stood in the doorway, elegant in a tailored black coat, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness as she took in the tableau before her. "What's going on?" "Claire, you said there was a family emergency." Michael half rose from his chair. "Marianne, I think you should—" "It was you." Rose's voice cut through the room, silencing everyone. She stood, small and straight as a blade. "You killed my mother. I recognized your perfume that night, and I recognize it now. Gardenia Nocturne. The police didn't believe me, but I know what I smelled." Marianne's laugh was brittle, theatrical. "What are you talking about? This is absurd." I rose slowly, positioning myself slightly in front of Rose. "We found your rental car, Miss Bailey, with Elizabeth's documents inside. And this." I held up the evidence bag with the charm. "We know she confronted you about the insurance fraud. We know you came back to the house that night." Something shifted in Marianne's eyes, a coldness replacing the practiced confusion. "You have nothing but the imagination of a traumatized child and some papers that could have come from anywhere." Her hand slipped into her coat pocket. "And no jury would ever take the word of a blind girl over mine." "They won't need to," I said quietly, nodding toward the mantelpiece. Marianne followed my gaze to where a small crystal bottle sat among the carved wooden animals, a bottle with an ornate stopper and a faded French label. Rose had found it hidden in the back of her mother's safe, wrapped in tissue paper, along with a note in Elizabeth's handwriting. "Proof." "That's my perfume," Marianne said, her voice suddenly hollow. "From my overnight bag. I looked everywhere for it after—" She stopped, realizing what she'd admitted. "Mom took it from your bag at dinner," Rose said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "I heard her in your room. She must have suspected even then. She kept it as evidence." Claire was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. Michael stood frozen between his sister and his wife, the family he thought he knew crumbling before his eyes. "Elizabeth always was too clever for her own good," Marianne said softly, her hand still in her pocket. "Always had to be the righteous one, the perfect one. She would have ruined everything, years of work, millions in policies, all because she couldn't mind her own business." "Marianne, don't—" Michael began, but she silenced him with a look. "It was quick," she said, her eyes finding Rose with a strange intensity. "I want you to know that. She barely had time to recognize me before it was over. I'm not a monster." "You killed my mother," Rose replied, her voice breaking for the first time. "What else would you call yourself?" The room fell silent save for Claire's muffled sobs. Marianne's hand emerged from her pocket, empty. Whatever she had been reaching for remained hidden. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the fight visibly leaving her body. "I never meant for any of this to touch you, Rose," she said quietly. "You weren't supposed to wake up. You weren't supposed to know." "But I did wake up," Rose answered, "and I do know. I'll always know." I moved to stand beside Rose, one hand on her shoulder. "Michael, call the police," I said, never taking my eyes off Marianne. "Tell them we have a confession to record and evidence to hand over." As Michael fumbled for his phone, I watched the final transformation of Marianne Bailey, from confident professional to trapped predator to something almost resigned. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation is when the cornered finally accepts there's no escape. But Marianne simply sank into the nearest chair, her eyes never leaving Rose. "You really can smell it, can't you?" she asked, something like wonder in her voice. "After all this time? That's extraordinary." "Yes," Rose answered simply. "I can." The admission hung in the air between them, victim and killer, connected by an invisible thread of scent that had ultimately led to this moment of truth. Rose had been believed at last, her gift validated in the most terrible way possible. The cost of that validation reflected in the tears on her face and in the fractured family around her. The sound of sirens in the distance grew slowly louder, heralding the official end to a case that had really been solved by a child's extraordinary sense and a mother's final, silent testimony. A bottle of perfume preserved as proof of betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. The interview room at Green Hollow Police Department smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, with undertones of decades of sweat and fear that no amount of bleach could ever fully erase. Rose sat across from Detective Mercer, her small frame dwarfed by the metal table between them, her dark glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Her hands rested on the table surface, occasionally tracing the scratches left by countless others who had sat in that same chair, some innocent, some guilty, all afraid in their own ways. I watched from the corner, no longer the lead on this case, but unable to sever myself from it, or from the child whose extraordinary gift had broken it wide open. "Start from the beginning," Mercer said, his voice gentler than I'd expected from a man whose face seemed permanently set in lines of skepticism. "In your own words," Rose nodded, her posture straight, despite the exhaustion evident in the slight droop of her shoulders. "I woke up at approximately 1:15 a.m. on the night of October 3rd. I remember because I heard the grandfather clock in the hallway chime once for the quarter hour." Her voice was clear, precise. "I woke because I smelled a perfume in the house, Gardenia Nocturne. It has a distinctive bitter almond undertone that most people can't detect." Mercer's pen scratched across his notepad. I'd insisted on a written statement rather than video. Rose's blindness made the standard recording protocols less useful, and I wanted her to feel as comfortable as possible. "Had you smelled this perfume before?" Mercer asked. "Yes. My Aunt Marianne Bailey wore it exclusively. It's been discontinued for years, which makes it very distinctive." Rose's fingers continued their restless exploration of the table's surface, mapping its imperfections. I heard voices from my mother's room, Mom's voice, raised but not shouting, and another voice I recognized as Aunt Marianne's. Then something fell, and there was silence, except for footsteps moving quickly through the house. I watched Rose's face as she recounted the worst night of her life, with a composure that would have impressed me in a seasoned witness, let alone a child. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face pale but determined, her lips set in a line that reminded me painfully of the photos of her mother. "The perfume got stronger as I made my way to Mom's room," she continued. "That happens when someone exerts themselves physically. The body heats up, releases more scent molecules. When I reached Mom, she was—" Rose's voice finally faltered. She was already gone, but the perfume was everywhere. Mercer nodded, his pen never stopping. And when did you first tell someone about recognizing this scent? I told the first officers who arrived. They wrote it down, but didn't ask any follow-up questions. A hint of bitterness crept into her voice. Later, I told the detectives assigned to the case. They suggested I might be confused due to trauma. From my corner, I watched Mercer's face as he processed this. To his credit, he showed no sign of the skepticism his colleagues had displayed. Perhaps the evidence we'd assembled, the rental car, the documents, Elizabeth's safe, the perfume bottle, Marianne's partial confession at the house, had been enough to overcome the usual resistance to unusual testimony. "Mr. Marshall," Mercer said, looking up at me, "can you explain how you became involved in this case?" I straightened in my chair. Claire Bailey asked me to speak with Rose after the funeral. Rose told me about recognizing the perfume at both the crime scene and at the funeral. Given my background in detection and my familiarity with cases involving unique witness perspectives, I agreed to look into it. What I didn't say was how Rose had awakened something in me that had been dormant since I'd turned in my badge. A sense of purpose, of responsibility to the truth, however uncomfortable. How her extraordinary abilities had reminded me of other cases, other children whose perceptions had been dismissed by those too conventional to see beyond their own limitations. Through the interview room's small window, I caught a glimpse of movement in the main bullpen. Marianne Bailey was being led to processing, her elegant coat replaced by standard-issue clothes, her practiced composure cracked enough to show the fear beneath. Despite everything, I felt a strange flicker of empathy for her. The most dangerous criminals I'd encountered weren't monsters, but ordinary people who'd made one terrible choice, then another, until they'd built a house of cards they'd kill to protect. "Rose," Mercer said, drawing my attention back to the interview, "you've provided detailed information about Continental Assurance and the insurance fraud your mother was investigating. How did you know about that?" "Mom kept physical copies of everything," Rose answered. "She would sometimes read aloud while she worked, especially when she was trying to solve a problem. I have excellent auditory recall. I remember most of what she said, and after she died, I found more documents in her safe." Mercer's eyebrows rose slightly. "You opened your mother's safe?" "Yes. She taught me the combination. It was my birthday. I opened it a week after she died when everyone was at the memorial service. I couldn't read the documents, obviously, but I kept them safe until Mr. Marshall could help me access them. The door opened, and an officer leaned in to whisper something to Mercer. He nodded, then turned back to us. "Ms. Bailey has been formally charged with first-degree murder and multiple counts of insurance fraud. The DA is also considering charges against Continental Assurance for corporate complicity." Rose's hands stilled on the table. "Will they believe me? About the perfume, I mean. In court?" Mercer smiled for the first time, a small, tired curve of his lips. "With the supporting evidence Mr. Marshall helped collect? Yes, your testimony will be crucial, but not isolated." After the interview concluded, we were led to a small waiting area where Claire and Michael sat on opposite ends of a bench, the physical distance between them a perfect reflection of the emotional chasm that had opened since last night. Claire's eyes were red-rimmed, her normally immaculate appearance rumpled from hours of questioning. Michael looked hollowed out, a man whose foundation had crumbled beneath him. "Rose," Claire said, rising as we approached. "Are you all right?" Rose turned toward her aunt's voice, her face unreadable behind her dark glasses. "No," she said simply, "but I will be." The simple dignity of her response struck me like a physical blow. This child, who had lost everything and been disbelieved at every turn, still stood straight, still faced forward, still believed in a future where things might be better than this terrible present. Michael remained seated, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The betrayal was too fresh, too absolute. His sister a murderer, his wife complicit in hiding evidence, his niece traumatized by events he'd unwittingly helped conceal. Some wounds never fully heal. They simply become part of who you are. Mercer pulled me aside as a victim advocate approached to speak with Rose. "You did good work here, Marshall," he said quietly. "Most of us wouldn't have taken a blind kid's testimony about perfume seriously. Certainly not enough to build a case on it." "I've learned to listen to witnesses others dismiss," I replied, watching Rose from across the room. "Sometimes they see things the rest of us miss." "The press is already gathering outside," Mercer warned. "Local business leader arrested for murder. Insurance fraud spanning multiple states. It's going to be a feeding frenzy, and the kid will be at the center of it." A knot formed in my stomach. Rose had endured so much already. Now she would face the brutal curiosity of the public, the sensationalism of the media, the grinding machinery of the justice system. And for what? Justice for her mother? Yes, but at what cost to her own future? "She'll need protection," I said. "Not just physical, emotional, legal. Someone to shield her from the worst of it." Mercer nodded, understanding in his tired eyes. "Like you?" The question hung in the air between us, unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. I hadn't planned to stay involved after the case was solved. I'd done my part, fulfilled my promise to look into Elizabeth's murder. My obligation was technically complete. Yet, as I looked at Rose across the room, her small shoulders squared against whatever came next, her extraordinary gift, both her strength and her burden, I knew I couldn't simply walk away. Not yet. "On someone," I agreed noncommittally. As we prepared to leave, navigating the labyrinthine hallways of the station toward a back exit Mercer had arranged to avoid the press, I heard snippets of conversation from officers and staff. Word was spreading rapidly throughout Green Hollow, the story growing with each retelling. The blind girl who solved her mother's murder with her sense of smell, the respected insurance executive with a secret life of fraud and violence, the retired detective pulled back into the darkness by a child's unwavering certainty. Rose's hand found mine as we approached the exit, her fingers cold but grip strong. "They're already turning us into a story," she said quietly, her head tilted toward the murmuring voices we passed. "Simplifying everything into heroes and villains." "That's what people do," I replied. "It's easier than facing the messy truth." "The truth matters most," she said, echoing her mother's words, "even when it hurts." The autumn air hit us as the door opened, carrying the scent of rain-soaked leaves and distant wood smoke. Morning was still hours away, the night around us heavy with the weight of everything that had changed since sunset. Justice had been set in motion, but resolution, that elusive sense of an ending, remained just out of reach. The first hint of dawn crept over the horizon like a hesitant apology, washing the porch of the Bailey house in pale gray light that seemed too fragile to last. Rose sat beside me on the steps, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days, its edges frayed in a pattern her fingers sometimes traced like reading a familiar story. We hadn't spoken for nearly 20 minutes, both of us listening to the world wake around us. Birds stirring in nearby trees, the distant hum of the occasional car, the house behind us settling and creaking as it cooled in the morning air. Some silences feel empty. This one was full of unsaid things, waiting like actors in the wings. I sipped coffee from a chipped mug Rose had produced from the kitchen, its warmth a poor defense against the October chill. The girl beside me seemed both older and younger than her 11 years, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark glasses perched on her nose despite the dim light, shoulders carrying a weight no child should have to bear. She'd insisted on coming back to the house after hours at the police station. Claire had gone to stay with a friend, unable to face the memories here, and Michael had disappeared to some hotel across town. Rose alone had wanted to return, claiming she needed to say goodbye properly. "Mr. Marshall," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness, "do you think my nose will ever stop bringing me pain?" The question caught me off guard with its directness, though I should have expected nothing less from her by now. I took another sip of coffee, buying time to consider my answer. "I don't think gifts ever stop being complicated," I said finally. "Your sense of smell helped find justice for your mother. That's something valuable, something important. But it also means I'll never forget," Rose said, her fingers continuing their restless movement along the blanket's edge. "Every time I smell gardenias, or bitter almonds, or even just a trace of something similar, I'll be back in that hallway heading toward Mom's room." A mourning dove called from somewhere nearby, its soft coo a counterpoint to our conversation. The sky had lightened to a pale blue, streaked with wisps of pink cloud. "When I was a detective," I said carefully, "I developed a knack for reading people. Their body language, their micro-expressions, the things they said and the things they didn't. It helped me solve cases, find truth where others couldn't, but it also meant I could never turn it off. Every conversation, every relationship became something to analyze." Rose turned toward me, her face tilted in that way that always made me feel she could see straight through me despite her blindness. "Did it make you lonely?" The question pierced something tender in my chest. "Yes," I admitted. "Sometimes. It's hard to connect when you're always looking for the hidden meaning behind everything." "But you wouldn't give it up," she said. "Not a question." "No, because even with the cost, it's part of who I am." I set my mug down on the step beside me. "Your sense of smell, it's extraordinary, Rose. Not just its acuity, but how you've learned to interpret what you perceive. Most people would have noticed the perfume that night, but never connected it to a specific person, never remembered it with such precision." "It doesn't feel like a choice," she said softly. "It just is." "Exactly." I looked out at the yard, where dew caught the strengthening light like scattered glass. "The real question isn't whether your gift will stop bringing pain, but whether you'll let that pain be the only thing you carry forward." Rose considered this, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond my words. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "To me, I mean. Claire and Michael are barely speaking. The house feels wrong." It was the question I'd been dreading since the case broke open. The fragile family structure that had formed around Rose after her mother's death had shattered. Claire, though not directly complicit in Elizabeth's murder, had protected Marianne out of misplaced loyalty. Michael was broken by his sister's betrayal. Neither seemed capable of providing the stability Rose needed. "There are options," I said carefully. "Your mother's will probably specify guardianship. If not, there are processes in place for situations like this." "Foster care," Rose said flatly. "I've heard the statistics for blind children in the system." I winced. Of course she would know. Elizabeth had been a social worker after all. "That's one possibility, but not the only one. There might be other family members or family friends your mother trusted." Rose's hand found mine on the step between us, her small fingers surprisingly warm against my perpetually cold ones. "Mom always said you were one of the good ones, that you cared about the truth, even when it hurt." The statement hit me like a physical blow. I'd wondered before how Elizabeth had spoken of me to her daughter, what connection had existed between us that I'd forgotten or never fully appreciated. "Your mother was an exceptional woman," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "She saw things clearly, even when others looked away." "Like me," Rose said with a small smile. "Just in a different way." The sun had fully cleared the horizon now, bathing the yard in golden light that seemed to expose every detail with unforgiving clarity. The peeling paint on the porch railing, the neglected flower beds Elizabeth would never tend again, the newspaper in its plastic sleeve tossed carelessly at the foot of the steps, its headline still hidden, but its contents undoubtedly featuring the sensational arrest of a respected insurance executive for murder and fraud. "I have regrets," I said suddenly, the words emerging unbidden. "Cases I couldn't solve, people I couldn't save. My own daughter—" I stopped, surprised at myself for mentioning Emma, a wound I rarely exposed to daylight. "I know," Rose said simply. "I smelled the grief on you the first time we met. Old leaves and rain, I called it. It's always there, under everything else." Her perception was uncanny, almost frightening in its accuracy. Yet instead of feeling exposed, I felt seen in a way few had ever managed. "The truth about gifts like ours," I continued, gathering myself, "is that they demand something from us. They're not just abilities, they're responsibilities. Your mother understood that. She used her position, her knowledge to help others, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Even when it killed her," Rose said quietly. "Even then—" I squeezed her hand gently. "But she wouldn't want your gift to become only a burden. She'd want you to use it the way she used her own talents, to make sense. She'd want you to use it the way she used her own talents, to make sense of the world even when it hurts," I finished, my voice low. Rose was quiet, her breath steady and slow. For the first time since her mother's funeral, she allowed herself to lean against my shoulder, just for a moment, as if she'd finally decided she didn't have to carry it all alone. The sun crept higher, warming the porch, turning the dew into 1,000 pinpricks of light. Somewhere in the kitchen, the phone rang. A new day, a new set of questions. But for now, there was only the soft hush of morning and the bitter-sweet certainty that sometimes the truth is all we have left. "Thank you, Mr. Marshall," Rose whispered, not lifting her head. I squeezed her hand, unsure who was comforting whom. And as we sat there listening to the quiet, I realized that sometimes even the sharpest senses can't prepare us for what comes next, but maybe, just maybe, they can help us survive it.